Okay, so horizon scanning. So you can see here a whole range of wonderful names of wonderful people who I have had the pleasure of chatting with for a few times in the last few weeks. And I thought I had a vague idea of what horizon scanning is. I now know that I don't have any idea what it is. And I'm sure none of you really have much of an idea either. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a bit of a taster session of what it can be. But before we do that, I will give a little bit of an overview of what horizon scanning might be within Access. And Clive is going to say something about the bigger picture, the context within we are thinking about horizon scanning. And then, thank you to Holly, who's here, Sue Williams, Gary Kass, Luke Maggs, Marcella, Sarah, Steve and Michelle, who are all going to help out run the sessions later on. And they have had instructions. And I think, Chris, you're helping out as well. You're not on the list. Sorry. I apologise. And Chris. So this is the overview. I'm going to do a little introduction. And then most of the work will be you doing the work. We have breakout groups. We have actually got 10 breakout groups, but because there were quite a few people on the original list, but maybe we can condense some groups and make them a bit smaller. At 3 o'clock, people have a little break, and people move back to this room, and we'll ask you all to do a little feedback of what you've done in your group, and then we'll wrap it up at the end. So the aim of the session really is to introduce the principles, goals, and the idea in the context of horizon scanning within Access, and give you a taster workshop, if you like. And in that workshop, what we're going to ask you to do is build what-if scenarios. We call them, they're not really scenarios, scenario vignettes, we call them, because they're not proper scenarios. Because one of the things I've learned is that actually proper horizon scanning takes several days. That requires workshops, not in 2 hours. Because, of course, of what we are doing here within Access, what we'd like you to then also think about is research questions, potential research questions for environmental social science that might come out. And obviously, we're also hoping that we're going to build an enthusiastic network of very willing participants to get engaged with future horizon scanning activities. So what is horizon scanning? As I said, I've learned that it's about 1 million different things, and there's a lot of different perspectives. I also learned that horizon scanning happens a lot in government, but it's a very different kind of horizon scanning, arguably, than what we're doing here. It's a much more sort of intense thing. We will probably come back to this at a future event. I found somebody saying this online, and I think it sums up very nicely what we're trying to aim to achieve here. A systematic process that can be used to change mindsets, to challenge assumptions, and to provide more options to ask the unasked questions and identify the unknowns. So it's really just to get people to think about other kinds of questions, different research questions, different ideas. What could it look like? What could the future look like, and what does that mean for environmental social science? So it's obviously not a one-size-fits-all approach. There's also no right or wrong answer. It is about thinking outside the box, if you like. It's also definitely not about predicting the future. And in fact, what we're going to ask you to do is start off with some potential future predictions. Is not quite the right word to use, but that have already been developed, and work within that. And the aim of horizon scanning within Access is to scope future environmental social science research questions using inclusive methods of participation with actors across all scales. So building on this co-production idea that we talked about earlier on today as well. And I'll say a little bit more towards the end of the session about what we've already done in relation to horizon scanning with ESRC. I don't want to say that now because it might shape you too much, but we will come back to that later on. There will be a horizon scanning within Access, of course, is a specific sort of set of tasks, but it also feeds into a lot of the other work package tasks within Horizon. So we will have assembly. In each assembly, we're intending to have some sort of horizon scanning in-person session. There will also be more specific workshops online related to particular topics, building on some of the work that we've already done with the SRC. And of course, it's also strongly linked to lots of other work packages, like Work Package 1, which is about assessing and learning, Work Package 3, which where horizon scanning fits in, and other places as well. And the idea of what we get out of these horizon scanning activities in these new questions that you are going to generate and develop is that they feed into future calls for research by the SRC, but also for our Flex Fund and some of our other activities as well. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Clive to show some. I hope I did it right. He gave me some pictures that I put in this slide, and they're not. See. Scroll.
There we go.
Oh, phew.
Good, thanks. So a couple of infographics, a sort of problem definition really. These two images were born of a sense of frustration of going along to endless meetings about climate and nature over several years. And certainly on the climate side, most of the discussion been about buildings, renewables, EVs, heat pumps and so on. And very little on food and the land and so on. So I felt that it was important to kind of sense check where we are and how we got here. This tries to describe the world as it is with a broken carbon cycle. And it's broken for two reasons. One, we burn fossil fuels, which would otherwise remain locked away in geological reservoirs for millions of years. And we also disturb the land and soils, which emits carbon that would otherwise be locked away in soils for thousands of years, up to 1 million in some tropical soils. And interestingly, soils are a bit of a Cinderella subject, given that we come to rely on them and totally for life on Earth, pretty much. And they regulate the global carbon cycle, so they're fundamentally important in controlling climate. And so in this sort of extractive linear economy that we have at the moment, we have degraded peatlands, serried ranks of conifers on the hills, livestock, sheep grazing on largely fertilizer-fed grasslands, and monoculture cropping on the lowlands. And about 2/3 of the problem arises from burning fossil fuels, and the other third of the problem arises from land use change. And so this is important because in terms of getting to net zero, stopping burning fossil fuels entirely will get us about 2/3 of the way there, but we've still got another third to go. And so we need to transform the way that we use land, most of which is predicated on fossil fuels at the moment and so on. So that's the sort of nature of the problem. And then moving to the solution, then we need a more circular economy, both in terms of the way that we use material flows and waste, where most of the current emphasis in terms of policy and practice is certainly in Scotland, but also on the kind of biological side of the equation as well, with soil health being at the centre of all land management practices, restoring peatlands in the uplands, mixed conifer systems, regenerative, restorative farming, and so on, more hedges, agroforestry, mixed arable livestock systems, etc., etc. And of course, all of this will have quite significant impacts for diets and consumption of stuff across the board. Very much the centre, I would hope, of what Access can sort of dig into. The diagram on the right then also emphasises, I think we've been doing some work on climate scenarios over the last kind of few weeks and months, but it emphasises that actually 1.5 is a kind of a no regrets scenario to aim for, because if we do that in the right way, including enhancing the diversity and resilience of natural systems, that will also build resilience to higher orders of climate change should the rest of the world remain on its 3 degrees pathway as we currently have it. So as a way of kind of framing issues, as it were, the challenge is, I think, an important challenge is, how does the use of the land contribute to getting into that 1.5 degrees space? And if it isn't, then, how can we justify that in terms of the circular economy and fixing that broken carbon cycle that we need to move towards? There you go.
Thank you very much. There you go. So that's what we aim to achieve eventually. So what we are going to ask you to do now is to engage in this taster session, if you like. And as I mentioned before, what we're going to ask you to do is generate research questions based on what-if scenarios or scenario vignettes. So within your group, you create a possible vignette scenario for the future. And within that, we're asking you to then think about, okay, what kind of research questions might that raise for environmental social science? 1 to 3 questions. So this is the timing of it, more or less. And what we're going to ask you to do is you can, of course, if you start horizon scanning from scratch, you get completely lost because you can go in all kinds of different directions. So we're going to give you a starting point. And each group is going to be given one challenge and one topic taken from the Go Science trend grid, which I will show you in a second. So the Government Office for Science have created this trends deck, and it's got all these different topics here: climate change, demographics, etc., and it's full of wonderful scenarios, trends, suggested, proposed trends for the future. And what we have basically done is quite randomly, really. I don't think there was much of a system here. We was sat down and we're like, let's pick these 5. We picked 5, and then we picked 3 within those 5. And then I have allocated each of you 3 of those possible 15 scenarios. So this is all of them. So here we have climate change, demographics, natural resources, governance and economics that we have selected, the 5 from the longer list that you saw earlier. So here you can see the ones that we picked. So for instance, within climate change, imagine global 2030 climate pledges are insufficient to limit warming to 2 degrees Celsius. So that'd be one of your starting points. So you'd be given 3 of these starting points, or from demographics, slowing global population growth rate. That's a given. So you get given 3 of these. You work in your group and to think about, okay, what would the future look like if these things continue or come true or further develop, and what kind of environmental social science research questions might we then want to ask now in order to address issues that might arise from that. Does that make sense? Yes? Your facilitators should have some prompting questions along the way to help you to guide your discussion. Sort of imagine, what would this look like? What would it be like to live in this scenario that you're thinking about, just to try and make it really specific and to really try and think of a research question. So as you mentioned before, remember the idea really is that we want you to think of different ideas, different challenges, think outside the box to you stretch your brain to come up with some novel, crazy ideas. And then we'll pass them on to ESRC and they're going to fund the research. Maybe. Okay, welcome back. I hope you have fun and or it wasn't too depressing. It was quite depressing in our group in the sense that what we talked about. So, as I said before, I'm going to give everyone, a representative of each group, just 2 minutes to feedback what they talked about. And I thought maybe we can start with people online first. I'm assuming there was 1 group online instead of 2, 3, I don't know how many. So I think you're all on mute. Can we unmute the online group? Oh, you can unmute yourself. Who's going to report back from the online group? Liz, I think, are you speaking?
Yeah, we had more than one online group.
There we go. We can hear you now.
Okay. So I volunteered, Birgitta.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. So Liz O'Brien from Forest Research. So I was facilitating a small but select group, but enthusiastic discussion. So our kind of three trends were food insecurity, lack of investment in infrastructure, and an older population, increase in the older population over 65. So we talked about kind of policy tensions in terms of transformation in land use, with sort of, a focus at the moment on nature recovery, that might lessen with kind of food insecurity, so more potential for agricultural intensification. And we talked about crops might need to change due to climate change, and there might be an increase in high-tech techniques, so vertical agriculture, but also some opportunities for a shift in diet to more healthy diets. And then when we talked a bit about the demographics, we talked about the provision of health and social care for the older adults rather than the younger old, and the strain that might put on the NHS. We talked about some of the divisions potentially between the generations, so sort of baby boomer with hedonic lifestyles, leisure, flying, but also, there might also be some of the younger, older age groups who are more into some environmental activism. And then the infrastructure, we were saying we're not learning the lessons from COVID. That was an opportunity for kind of policymakers to kind of shape new social norms about how we use, what sort of cars we use and public transport. We're not moving also to kind of building sustainably. So that's not entirely a vignette, but those are the things we talked about. And then our three kind of questions. So we didn't get a chance to choose the top one, but I'm sure we could. So there was one about kind of research on the lifestyle of retirees and their impacts on the environment. And that would be kind of longitudinal research, so kind of pre-retirement through to retirement as a younger old person and then as an old person. We also talked about research around exploring the interaction of ageing cohorts and grandchildren, so that intergenerational research. And the timeframes are really important there. So, the grandchildren, experiencing much more of the climate impacts. And then the final question, how to bring kind of health and the environment together for different age groups and explore differences between rural and urban areas. So that kind of separation of health and the environment at the moment, we've got the obesity strategy, doesn't really kind of touch on the environment. But we could explore that through a kind of concept of place, through that sort of lens, and think about what are the kind of interventions in civil society and businesses to kind of support change, to bring together kind of ideas of health and the environment and the health of people and the health of the environment. So that's kind of a bit of a précis of what we got up to.
Excellent, thank you very much. I know it was not a lot of time, was it, to get into a lot of depth. Just one quick question, you can brief answer. Do you think the questions that you came up with were informed by the sort of thinking about horizon scanning, the scenario? You would have come up with similar questions, or the questions were slightly different because of the process?
We didn't kind of touch on that, but I think, having the sort of three trends helped us to kind of focus. So, yes, I think we might not have come up with it without that kind of focus on those sort of horizon scanning trends.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's because, that's one of the ideas behind doing something like this, is to, get you to think, come up with different questions because of the process. So, excellent. Thank you very much. I will hand over to a group in the audience. There we go. A volunteer. Oh.
Got a roving mic. Okay. Fab. So, we had a really good discussion in our group. Oh, is that better? Yeah. Okay. So we had three different themes. We had more extreme weather. we had decreased energy demand but increased renewables, and we had young people in low-paid jobs and on 0-hour contracts. So we talked about a lot of different topic areas within that. A lot of our discussion focused around inequality, particularly around that extreme weather and in distribution of wealth among generations. So we talked around retrofit of housing and what sort of housing you'd need in this new future where we're seeing a lot more flooding, a lot more heat waves and things like that. So in terms of our questions, we probably had about 21 questions in the end, and these have not been structured particularly, so they'll just give you a flavour, hopefully. So one of them was around how will extreme weather drive inequality in the UK? Another was on how do we design more resilient communities to support each other through these futures where we've got more extreme weather? And what type of skills do we need for the future? So this was particularly around buildings and retrofit and renewables and the types of skills we'll need for that. That was it, but there's loads more, so we'll probably circulate notes afterwards.
Excellent, thank you. Interesting, because we had extreme weather was dominating a lot of our discussion as well. Because I guess maybe it's easier to imagine what that does to the world. But yeah, really excellent, interesting, and perfect timing. That's why I'm waffling to fill up more time, and I'll shut up now. Next group. There we go.
I think our orator left, so I'll take over. So we had 3 things, again, like everyone else: projected decreases in UK energy demand. We didn't know whether or not that means that we've met them or that we haven't met them, but we were going on the assumption that we've met our projected decreases in energy demand. Huge regional variations in global water stress and climate change leading to an increased regularity of storms and things like that. So those are the ones we were dealing with. We started with quite a dystopian view of the future, which was talking about compounding inequalities and migration of peoples causing social conflict. But we settled on a more positive view of the future. And so we actually saw these challenges as providing us with a real sort of galvanisation, a focus around giving people higher quality life. The UK leading the green energy revolution, driving down energy prices. The UK being a superpower across nations, accepting climate migrants and becoming a leader in adaptation. And so that focus on adaptation was very clear in our questions. So our questions focused on how to adapt when whole communities are at risk from some of these climate events. Talking about how we can adapt housing, how to improve our current housing and future housing stocks to meet with future climate issues, and also then looking at broader models of governance, regional governance. How can we ensure that those are put in place in order to manage these future threats? So a very positive view of the future from our room.
Thank you, lovely. That's very good. Were there any other groups?
Birgitta, we had some online.
Sorry?
We had some online.
Sorry, Gary, were you?
Yeah. So there's more than one online group.
Okay.
So,
right, you go first. Go on, Gary.
So I don't know if there was a mix-up, but we ended up with the same 3 as listed. But we had a completely different conversation, which is itself really, really interesting. So again, we were looking at those, as I say, the same three trends, and our kind of the vignette that we shaped was really characterised by increased climate change risks for food security, exacerbating and exacerbated by reduced investment in infrastructure that it was both affecting and affected by an ageing population. And that led to 3 really interesting but linked research questions. The first of which was, to what extent is climate change risk a driver of business decision making for land managers under conditions of increasing volatility? How does the ageing population affect the capacity to adapt? And what might the effects of the above be on polarisation across the land management sector? We did have a little bit of a reflection on the process, and the phrase "quite fun" was written down with quotation marks. It was new to the group, but found as being helpful for generating some ideas. The role of the facilitator, I think, is quite important, having some knowledge of the process and some knowledge of the content as well, I think helps to, was felt there. And there were some issues around the language of horizon scanning, the language of trends, and that kind of thing as well, we would need to build in. And then clearly, because it was just a taste that, how would this work on a larger scale over a longer time scale?
Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah. Very good points. You remind me as well, it would be really useful if people could write down the questions or the notes or the questions, at least definitely the questions that they came up with. Maybe the groups online can put them in the notes so that we can capture them. Thank you.
Thank you. So our scenarios were again similar. We had the kind of increases in weather and climate events affecting people, and then reduced investment in infrastructure. But the difference that we had was more than 50% of the world's population, I think, live in democratic countries or democracies. We actually had an interesting conversation about, well, we don't really know where we are right now. Is that a good increase? Much of an increase? Anyway, so that kind of some of the key things that came out of our discussion in terms of the scenario with things like reduced food security, increases in things like flooding, increases in inequality, the need for kind of even more emergency responses, because if there's reduced investment in infrastructure and prevention, we're just dealing with many more immediate crises. Lots of positive and negative potential impacts, so things like, increased demand for immediate solutions and the kind of necessity of response. Maybe that leads to the emergence of greater local action, greater sense of local democracy, but maybe that's an unequal response potentially, different communities with different resources, etc. And then also that might drive greater need for mitigation and adaptation to not be seen as separate things. They need to be part of the same solution. So we were kind of focusing on, talking about greater need for, or even greater need for, multi-benefit, multi-purpose solutions and system-based solutions. In terms of the questions, we had 10, 12, maybe more. We were thinking about questions that kind of addressed, the inequalities, who's going to be most unequally impacted, etc. Who are the key actors? How can we understand the decision making of different actors that increase or reduce inequalities, etc. And in the end, we tried to come up with one overarching question, which we had lots of debate around language, so we're still not happy with it. But here we go. This is our thing, was how can we create governance and institutional mechanisms that embed social justice and systems thinking to produce whatever solution it is that we need? And that's, I think, where we got to. Then we ran out of time and ran for coffee.
Fair enough. Thank you. Excellent. Right, I'll share the thoughts of the last group, which was our group. I can't remember which ones. Well, we had 3 scenarios, obviously. One was about pollinators, one was about droughts, and the other one was about infrastructure. And we talked mostly, very depressingly, about how people were going to migrate to the north or move to Scotland, because it was the only place where we could still live, and it was quite depressing. So climate migration, whatever that form whatever form that takes, is something that we talked about a lot, and rising inequalities. And so we sort of concluded that really the scenario is something along the lines of that the specific drivers, that the 3 that we were talking about, are a manifestation of not having addressed climate challenges to begin with, and in particular would have impact on underinvestment, pollinator decline, and increasing inequalities impacting the poor particularly. And then I have probably about 15 questions here, so I will just pick one from the bottom and one in the middle. One of them was, how do we move people from competing and migrating to coming together and adopting collective action to actually prevent all of this from happening? This was our positive question. Untangling and understanding of the immediate crisis events and the underlying longer-term systemic issues. So very big questions, really. And I've got another question here, something around the consequences of climate migration and having hard boundaries, which meant that climate migration can't actually necessarily happen, on security and well-being, mental health and well-being. I'll leave it there, unless anyone desperately wants to add something. Oh, we made lots of post-it notes, which are now falling on the floor.
There was another group online, Birgitta, as well.
Did you have 3 groups online?
We had 3 groups online.
Gosh, that's very greedy. No.
And I think we all had the 3 same trends as well, so I don't think they were randomised. But
oh, really?
Similarly to Gary, I think what it kind of showed was that you could take the same 3 trends, so this kind of impact of climate change on food security, the projected slowdown in global investment in infrastructure and the increase in demographics, and approach the conversation from very different perspectives. So we had an interesting discussion really around kind of the change in migration patterns. So with an aging population and the impacts on food security, we sort of felt that would need to see a kind of transient workforce coming in with a kind of potential clash of cultures around values and perceptions of the natural environment. We felt that the existing population in the UK, if it ages, we're going to get that kind of slightly shift to the right, slightly harder to engage, perhaps more propensity to pay for borders and defence. Interesting discussions around the role for business and the expectation and the willingness to pay. In terms of where we ended up focusing our efforts from the research questions, we were interested really in this kind of principle of sort of shared and contested values, but particularly around the 3 following user groups. So one was around landowners, particularly around the farming, but broader than that, around their sort of, I guess, the perception and motivations of how they see themselves as landowners, like custodians of the countryside or producers of the food or protectors of security. That's quite an interesting sort of rich topic in its own right. The role of business, if we're asking people to potentially invest in failing infrastructure, sort of why would they? It's already failing now, so what would be their motivation to pay for something that's already declining? And then finally, we wanted to look really a bit around what would the public be like in that kind of scenario, that future. There could be a growth in NIMBYism. You don't want to see more wind farms, more renewable energy installations, potentially a clash between conservation and food. So we were really interested in exploring those kind of 3 user groups and their motivations: the landowners, the business users, and the general public perception. But we used the same 3 trends as well. I think that was all the groups online, Birgitta.
Excellent, thank you very much. It's really interesting that you got the same. It was meant to be randomly allocated, but it's really interesting that you all went in a slightly different direction. That's which suggests, I guess, that it gets people to think in a different way. So that's good. Excellent. Thank you very much. Right, we are done with this sort of taster horizon scanning. I was going to just briefly end with saying a little bit about what we might do with all of this from here. Is this the right one? I need that technical support is coming. There we go. Right, so there we go, we've done this. So as I mentioned before, what we would really like to do is collate the questions that you've come up with, but we will come back to this and we'll do a proper, full-scale horizon scanning type of activity at some point, and which will feed into research questions for ESRC and for our Flex Fund as well, and for our other activities as well. Just wanted to very briefly say that we've done a little bit of work already with the ESRC that was using some form of horizon scanning, although I'm sure that the experts I have now met in horizon scanning would say that this has nothing to do with horizon scanning, but it's a little bit different. So ESRC was put together a proposal for some funding, future calls for funding, and they asked us to reflect on this. I don't know if some of you responded to the survey that Sarah sent out, so those who responded to that, thank you very much. You might remember this. And we used that, and Sarah Golding over there also looked at did some analysis of some climate citizens' assemblies, that's the ones, my brain's completely starting to malfunction now. And that fed back into what the ESRC asked us to look at. So that was then submitted to Council in May, and several themes came from that. So place-based solutions, sustainable living, economic solutions, and co-production. If you would like to know more about this, please let me know. We can share the document with you. And this is going to be taken forward by ESRC, but we're going to do another activity to get with people like yourselves within Access to develop that a little bit further, and then ESRC is going to take that forward to actually put together a call. What exactly that looks like, how much money will be involved in that, we do not know, but something will happen. So watch that space. So we've come to the end of the day and a half, 2 days. I thought, thank you very much for all your input. I think we had wonderful discussions. I got a lot out of this. I hope you all got a lot out of this. I met a lot of people in 3D, and I also met new people, which is amazing as well, of course. I think it's really important that we meet in person. So we've had lots of very different kinds of conversations, I think. So this is the way to build proper relationships. So I want to thank everyone who's run a session for all the work they've put into the session, because they've done an amazing job. We've had some really interesting sessions, and they're all really different as well. So I thought that was just amazingly done. And obviously I want to thank Becky and I want to thank Sarah, because they've been absolutely amazing putting all of this together. So I think that you deserve a round of applause. You do. You put a huge amount of effort into it, and it was just a wonderful event. So I thoroughly enjoyed myself. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again at some point in person. Definitely again next year for an assembly, but hopefully before then. I would like to ask Patrick if he would like to say something.
Thanks, Birgitta. I'll try and croak a few words without taking up too much more of your time. But I think it's important to see this in the context of the 5 years that Access will be going. This is just our first annual assembly, and it's in quite early days. The decision to hold it so early in the work programme, before we'd even really got most of our staff recruited, maybe not have been the wisest thing, but we've been really fortunate to have so many people working really hard behind the scenes in Exeter to make it happen, really. And I hope everybody, particularly those who attended in person, enjoyed the trip and the hospitality over the last couple of days. We do intend to hold one of these each year, and I think we are also thinking of rotating the venues. So we may well be travelling to places like Bath, Sussex, Leeds, who knows? I think we have to discuss that, but there will be opportunities to gather in other parts of the country, hopefully, around this time in subsequent years. And I think what I've really valued is the willingness of people from really quite disparate parts of the environmental social science community to come together. And the breakout groups have been really good because of that. We've had very mixed people participating and bringing different experiences to bear and from different career stages. So whilst we do have some work to do on diversity overall as a project, I still think we did pretty well, given we've only really just started at this particular event. This won't be the only annual kind of gathering we do. As Birgitta has already suggested, we will be holding, for example, things like annual summer schools for ECRs, and as Saffron mentioned, from next year we'll be doing things like a transdisciplinary leadership college. So there will be many of these kind of events and gatherings which Access will hope to put on over the next 5 years. And I hope that we might be able to show increasing integration of those networks over time, and with the positive outcome that we manage to make the flows of knowledge to work better across these sectoral boundaries that we've been talking about, so that the environmental social science gets to people at the right time, in the right format, with hopefully that broader long-term benefit on the environmental challenges that I started off with yesterday. So, yeah, thank you very much to Katia as well, who was part of the organisational team, not here today. To everybody who attended online, we had people coming in remotely who were not part of the original Access partnership, but were invited to come along because they were curious about what this project might hold. And I hope they had a good time and an interesting set of discussions and will come back and join our broader network. So thanks to you, Birgitta, for standing in at the last minute. And I really hope I didn't give anybody COVID for you guys a couple of minutes ago. But anyway, hopefully COVID will be a thing of the past fairly soon. But thank you again to everybody who came, and wishing you all safe travels home, whether you're remote or face-to-face. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Patrick. I still feel very healthy, so, you know. I think the final thing, yes, Kate was just pointing that the right direction as well. The final thing we should do is look at the beautiful drawing, sketch, what do we call it, thing? Do we have a name for it? A visual, beautiful visual. Do you want to move your laptop so people on screen can see it as well? It looks amazing, and we've been hearing lots of interesting squeaky noises of pens in the background for quite a long time. So it looks fantastic. I hope you can see it on screen. We will obviously take a photograph of it, or several photographs, and then put it on the website, I guess, because it looks amazing. Oh, excellent! It's on Twitter already. So and that's it. We're all done. So everybody's free to get up and to go and have a closer look. And please take some cake home with you. Any of the food that's left over, food waste is not good for the environment. So thank you again. Thank you very much.